The morning started like any other Tuesday for Daniel. He woke up on a piece of cardboard behind the old bakery on Fifth Avenue. His green military jacket pulled tight around him. The November wind had a bite to it, the kind that cuts right through whatever layers you're wearing. He'd been sleeping in that spot for almost 2 years now, ever since everything in his life had fallen apart. Daniel was 42 years old, though most people who passed him on the street probably thought he looked older. That's what living rough does to you. The lines on his face told stories he didn't like to remember. Stories from a war halfway across the world. Stories of coming home to a country that didn't quite know what to do with broken soldiers like him. He folded up his cardboard bed and tucked it behind the dumpster. Some of the newer homeless folks didn't understand the unspoken rules of street life, but Daniel had learned them well. You keep your spot clean. You don't cause trouble. You stay invisible as much as possible. That's how you survive out here. By noon, Daniel had taken his usual position on the corner near the fancy coffee shop. He had a small paper cup in front of him, and he'd written "Veteran Anything Helps" on a piece of cardboard. He wasn't aggressive about it like some people. He'd just sit there quietly, nodding thanks to anyone who dropped $1 or some change. Most people walked right past without making eye contact. Daniel understood. He'd probably done the same thing before his life went sideways. The lunch rush was picking up. Well-dressed business people hurried past, talking on their phones, carrying expensive bags, living lives that seemed like they belonged to a different universe. Daniel watched them with no bitterness, just a quiet observation. He'd learned not to be angry about things he couldn't change. That's when he noticed her. A woman in her early 30s wearing clothes that probably cost more than Daniel used to make in a month. She had that look about her, the kind of polish and confidence that comes from never having to worry about where your next meal is coming from. She was pushing one of those high-end baby strollers, the kind that probably has more features than most cars. The woman stopped at the crosswalk, pulling out her phone. She seemed distracted, scrolling through something with a slight frown on her face. The baby stroller was positioned just in front of her, and Daniel could see a tiny hand waving from inside it. The baby couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 months old. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion, though in reality it was probably just a few seconds. The woman had positioned the stroller on a slight incline, and Daniel noticed something was wrong immediately. The stroller started to move, just a little at first. The woman was so absorbed in her phone that she didn't notice right away. The stroller picked up speed, rolling away from her, heading straight toward the busy intersection. For a split second, everything seemed frozen. Then the woman looked up and her phone clattered to the sidewalk. Her scream cut through the noise of the city like a knife. My baby. Oh God, my baby. She lunged forward, but she was wearing heels and stumbled. The stroller was already several feet away and gaining speed. People around them froze, their brains not quite processing what was happening fast enough to react. But Daniel's brain was different. Years of military training had wired him to respond to danger without thinking. His body moved before his conscious mind even registered what was happening. He dropped his coffee cup and pushed himself up from the sidewalk. His legs were stiff from sitting and his knees weren't what they used to be. But adrenaline has a way of making you forget about pain. He ran. Daniel hadn't run like this in years. His worn-out sneakers slapped against the concrete as he sprinted toward the runaway stroller. Behind him, he could hear the mother's terrified screams. Around him, people were starting to shout. The stroller reached the curb and bumped down onto the street. A delivery truck was coming from the left, its driver completely unaware of the tiny stroller now rolling into his path. The driver was probably going 30 miles an hour, maybe more. At that speed, he wouldn't be able to stop in time. Daniel's lungs were burning. He hadn't pushed his body like this since before he'd ended up on the streets. But he didn't slow down. He couldn't. There was a baby in that stroller, and if he didn't reach it in the next few seconds, that baby was going to die right there in front of dozens of witnesses. He reached the edge of the curb just as the stroller rolled further into the street. Daniel didn't hesitate. He jumped off the curb and grabbed the stroller with both hands, yanking it backward with every bit of strength he had left. The force of his pull sent him stumbling backward. He crashed onto the pavement, the stroller clutched tight against his chest. He felt the impact jar through his spine, but he kept his grip firm, making sure the stroller stayed upright. The delivery truck's brakes squealed. The smell of burning rubber filled the air. The truck stopped about 2 feet from where Daniel lay sprawled on the ground, still holding the stroller. For a moment, everything was completely silent. Even the usual noise of the city seemed to fade away. Then the baby started crying. And it was the most beautiful sound Daniel had ever heard, because crying meant alive. Crying meant okay. The mother reached them a second later. She was sobbing, her face streaked with tears and makeup. She grabbed the baby from the stroller, pressing the tiny body against her chest. "Oh, thank God. Thank God, thank you," she kept repeating, looking at Daniel like he'd just performed a miracle. Daniel slowly got to his feet. His back hurt where he'd hit the ground and his hands were scraped from the pavement, but he was smiling. The baby had stopped crying now and was looking around with wide, curious eyes, completely unaware of how close she'd just come to tragedy. "Is she okay?" Daniel asked, his voice rough. The woman nodded frantically, checking her baby over. "She's fine, she's perfect, oh my God, you saved her life." A crowd had gathered now. People had their phones out. Some were calling 911, others were taking pictures and videos. The truck driver had gotten out of his vehicle, his face pale and shaken. "I didn't see them until the last second," he kept saying to anyone who would listen. If this man hadn't grabbed that stroller, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone knew how that sentence ended. The woman was trying to pull Daniel closer, still holding her baby. "What's your name? Please, I need to know your name. I need to thank you properly." "Daniel," he said quietly. "But really, it's okay. I'm just glad your little one is safe." No, it's not okay," she insisted. She was fumbling with her purse now, pulling out her wallet. "Please, let me give you something. Let me help you." She was holding out what looked like several $100 bills. Daniel looked at the money, then at the woman's desperate, grateful face, then at the baby who was now playing with her mother's necklace, completely oblivious to everything. "Keep your money," Daniel said gently. "Buy something nice for your baby. That's all the thanks I need." Before the woman could protest, before the police arrived, before the crowd could swallow him up with questions and attention, Daniel turned and walked away. His legs were shaky and his heart was still racing. But he needed to get away from all those staring eyes. He made his way back to his corner, but his coffee cup was knocked over and his cardboard sign was trampled by the crowd. He didn't bother picking them up. Instead, he just sat down against the wall and took a deep breath. His hands were still shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline slowly leaving his system. He'd saved a life today, a tiny, innocent life. For the first time in years, Daniel felt like maybe he wasn't completely useless after all. He had no idea that at that very moment, videos of what he'd done were already being uploaded to social media. He had no idea that within hours millions of people would be watching him sprint across that street. He had no idea that the woman whose baby he'd saved was about to turn his entire world upside down. All Daniel knew was that it was getting cold. Evening was coming and he needed to figure out where he'd sleep that night. Just another day on the streets. Or so he thought. The video hit the internet like wildfire. Within 2 hours of the incident, someone had uploaded the footage to social media, and it was spreading faster than anyone could have predicted. The clip was only 23 seconds long, but those 23 seconds captured everything. The stroller rolling toward traffic, a homeless man jumping up and sprinting across the sidewalk, the desperate grab, the truck screeching to a stop, the mother's relief. By evening, it had been shared 50,000 times. By midnight, that number had jumped to 500,000. People couldn't stop watching it. They couldn't stop talking about it. The comments section exploded with reactions. "This man is a hero. Look how fast he moved. While everyone else just stood there, he saved that baby's life. This made me cry. Faith in humanity restored." News outlets picked up the story by morning. It was featured on the local news first, then the national broadcasts. A grainy screenshot of Daniel, frozen mid-sprint, became the image everyone associated with the story. "Homeless veteran saves baby from oncoming traffic," read the headlines. But Daniel didn't know any of this. He didn't have a phone. He didn't have internet access. He was completely unaware that he'd become famous overnight. He spent that Tuesday night at the shelter on Maple Street. It was one of the few places that didn't require you to attend a religious service or listen to a sermon before giving you a bed. Daniel appreciated that. He'd lost his faith somewhere between his third tour and his divorce, and he wasn't interested in finding it again. The shelter was crowded and noisy, but it was warm. That was enough. Daniel lay on his thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's events in his mind. The baby's face kept coming back to him, those wide, innocent eyes, the small hand waving in the air, the sound of her crying after he'd pulled her to safety. He'd saved a life today. That had to count for something, right? Meanwhile, across town in a penthouse apartment, Victoria Ashford couldn't sleep. She was sitting in her daughter's nursery, watching little Lily sleep peacefully in her crib. Every time Victoria closed her eyes, she saw that stroller rolling toward the street. She saw the truck. She saw how close she'd come to losing everything that mattered. Her husband, Robert, had come home to find her still shaking, still crying, hours after the incident. She'd told him the whole story 3 times because she couldn't quite believe it herself. How she'd been distracted by a work email. How the stroller's brake must have malfunctioned. How a homeless man she'd probably walked past dozens of times had saved their daughter's life. "We need to find him," Victoria said to Robert. "We need to thank him properly." "He didn't want your money," Robert pointed out gently. "You said he walked away. I don't care. He saved Lily's life. We can't just do nothing." Robert knew that tone. Once his wife set her mind on something, there was no talking her out of it. "Okay, we'll find him. I'll make some calls tomorrow." But Victoria was already on her laptop scrolling through social media. That's when she found it. The video. She'd had no idea that anyone had been filming. She watched it once, her hand covering her mouth. Then she watched it again. And again, the comments brought tears to her eyes. Thousands of strangers moved by what this man had done. Strangers who would probably walk right past him on the street without a second glance. She looked at the screen capture of Daniel. Really looked at him. He was wearing an old military jacket. His hair was messy and his beard was unkempt, but his eyes had this intensity to them, this focus, like he was still a soldier even after everything. Victoria started reading the comments more carefully. Some people claimed to recognize him. "That's Daniel, he's always on 5th Avenue near the coffee shop. I've seen that guy. He never bothers anyone, just sits there quietly. I gave him $5 once and he said, 'God bless you,' so politely." She kept reading deeper into the thread. One comment caught her attention. "I was in the service with a Daniel who looked like that. Daniel Hayes, good soldier. Heard he had a rough time when he came back." Victoria immediately opened a new tab and started searching. Daniel Hayes, veteran. She found a few news articles from years ago. A Daniel Hayes who'd been awarded a Bronze Star for valor. A Daniel Hayes who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan. The photo in the article was old, but she recognized the eyes. "Robert," she called out. "Come here. I think I found him." By morning, Victoria had hired a private investigator. She wanted to know everything. Not because she was nosy, but because she needed to understand. How does someone who saved lives overseas end up living on the streets? How does a decorated veteran fall through the cracks? The investigator's name was Patricia Chen, and she was good at her job. Within 48 hours, she had a complete report. Daniel Hayes, 42 years old, 3 tours in Afghanistan, Bronze Star recipient, honorable discharge, came home with severe PTSD and nightmares that wouldn't stop. His wife couldn't handle it. The marriage lasted 8 months after his return before she filed for divorce. Daniel tried to hold it together. He really did. He got a job in construction, but the loud noises triggered his anxiety. He'd have panic attacks on the job site. Eventually, he was let go. He applied for VA benefits, but the system was overwhelmed. The wait times were 6 months, then 9 months, then a year. By the time his claim was processed, Daniel had already lost his apartment. He'd been sleeping in his car for a while until the car was repossessed. The report noted that Daniel had no family. His mother had died of cancer 4 years ago. His father had passed when Daniel was overseas. No siblings, no close relatives, just him, alone in a city of millions. But here's what struck Victoria most. Despite everything, people at the shelter described Daniel as kind. He shared his food when he had extra. He never got into fights. He helped new people learn the ropes of surviving on the streets. One shelter worker was quoted saying, "Daniel is one of the good ones. Never complains. Always says please and thank you." You'd never know he was struggling so much inside. Victoria read the report 3 times, tears streaming down her face. This man, this good man who'd served his country and saved her baby's life, was sleeping on the streets while she lived in a penthouse. The injustice of it made her physically ill. "This isn't right," she told Robert. "None of this is right." "What do you want to do?" Robert asked. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, thinking. An idea was forming in her mind. Something big. Something that would change everything. "I want to call a press conference," she finally said. Robert looked surprised. "A press conference?" "Victoria, you hate publicity. I know. But this is important. This is bigger than my comfort zone." She spent the next 3 days planning. She made phone calls. She met with lawyers and accountants. She reached out to the media. And through Patricia, she tried to find Daniel. It wasn't hard. He was right where he always was, on his corner near the coffee shop. Patricia approached him carefully, explaining who she was and what Victoria wanted to do. Daniel was hesitant at first, suspicious even. People didn't usually seek out homeless guys unless they wanted something. "She just wants to thank you properly," Patricia explained. "And she has a proposal for you. No strings attached. You can say no if you want." Daniel agreed to meet mostly because he was curious. What could a rich woman possibly have to propose to someone like him? The meeting was set for Thursday morning at a small cafe. Victoria arrived early, nervous in a way she hadn't been since her first day of college. When Daniel walked in, looking uncomfortable in the clean restaurant environment, Victoria stood up immediately. "Daniel," she said, her voice catching, "thank you for coming, and thank you for saving my daughter's life. I know I already said that, but I'll never be able to say it enough." Daniel nodded awkwardly. "How's the baby doing?" "She's perfect. She's home with a nanny right now, completely oblivious to how famous she's become." "Famous?" Victoria pulled out her phone and showed him the video. Daniel watched in silence, his face unreadable. When it ended, he just shook his head. "I didn't know anyone was filming. Over 5 million people have watched this," Victoria told him. "You're a hero to them. You're a hero to me." Daniel looked uncomfortable with that word. Hero. He'd heard it before in the military. It never felt right. He was just doing what needed to be done. "I want to help you," Victoria said, leaning forward. "And before you say no, please just hear me out. I've been thinking about this a lot over the past few days. What I want to do, it's not charity. It's not pity. It's gratitude, and it's justice, and it's me trying to do something that should have been done a long time ago." Daniel listened as Victoria laid out her plan. With every word, his eyes grew wider. This woman wasn't just offering him money. She was offering him his life back. And not just his life, but the lives of hundreds, maybe thousands of other veterans like him. When she finished, Daniel was silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Why? Why would you do all this?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "Because you gave me everything when you saved my daughter. And because reading about what happened to you made me realize how broken our system is. You served your country. You earned that Bronze Star. You saved lives overseas, and you saved my baby's life here at home. And in return, this country let you sleep on the streets. That's not okay. That will never be okay." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Let me help you, please. Let me try to make this right." Daniel looked down at their hands. Her skin was soft and clean. His was rough and dirty, 2 different worlds connected by one terrifying moment and one tiny baby girl. "Okay," he finally said. "Okay." Victoria smiled through her tears. "Good, because we have a press conference on Friday and I want you standing right next to me." The days leading up to the press conference felt surreal to Daniel. Victoria had arranged for him to stay in a hotel, which was the first time he'd slept in an actual bed in almost 2 years. The mattress felt too soft, the room too quiet. He kept waking up in the middle of the night, disoriented, expecting to find himself back on the cardboard behind the bakery. On Wednesday morning, Victoria sent someone to take Daniel shopping for clothes. A young guy named Tyler who worked in fashion and treated Daniel like a regular client, not a charity case. They spent 3 hours finding clothes that fit properly, a suit for the press conference, casual clothes for every day, shoes that didn't have holes in them. "You clean up nice," Tyler said with a genuine smile as Daniel looked at himself in the fitting room mirror. Daniel barely recognized the man staring back at him. He looked almost normal, almost like the person he used to be before the war, before everything fell apart. That evening, Victoria invited Daniel to dinner at her home. He almost said no. The idea of sitting in some fancy penthouse, eating expensive food, making small talk with rich people, made his anxiety spike. But Victoria had been nothing but kind to him, so he agreed. The apartment was exactly what Daniel expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that probably cost more than most cars, art on the walls that Daniel didn't understand but assumed was important. But what he didn't expect was how normal Victoria and her husband Robert were. "Come in, please," Robert said, shaking Daniel's hand firmly. "Victoria's told me everything. What you did for our family, there aren't words big enough to say thank you." Little Lily was there too, playing on a blanket with her toys. When she saw Daniel, she smiled and waved her tiny hand. Something in Daniel's chest tightened. This little person with her whole life ahead of her almost didn't make it past 8 months old. The weight of that hit him all over again. "Can I hold her?" Daniel asked quietly. "Of course," Victoria said, scooping up Lily and gently placing her in Daniel's arms. The baby looked up at him with curious eyes, then grabbed his finger with her small hand. Daniel felt tears sting his eyes. He'd held plenty of babies before, back when his life was normal. His sister had kids. He used to be Uncle Daniel, but that felt like a lifetime ago. "She likes you," Victoria said softly. Over dinner they talked. Really talked. Victoria wanted to know everything about Daniel's military service, about his life before the streets, about what he wanted for his future. Daniel found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years. Maybe it was because Victoria actually listened. She didn't just hear him. She listened with her whole attention, asking questions that showed she really cared about the answers. The worst part wasn't being homeless, Daniel admitted. It was being invisible. You're right there on the sidewalk and people look through you like you're a ghost, like you're not even human anymore. After a while, you start to wonder if maybe they're right. Maybe you're not worth noticing. Victoria's eyes glistened. "You were never invisible, Daniel. You were always worth noticing. We just failed you. Society failed you, and I want to change that." She pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "This is what I'm proposing at the press conference. I wanted you to see it first." Daniel opened the folder and started reading. The more he read, the more his hands started to shake. This wasn't just about him. This was about every veteran sleeping on the streets, every soldier who'd come home broken and been left to piece themselves back together alone. Victoria was planning to start a foundation. A real organization with real funding. She was putting in $5 million of her own money to start. The foundation would provide 3 things: immediate housing, comprehensive mental health care, and job training. But here's what made it different from other programs. It would assign each veteran a case manager who would stay with them for 2 years. Someone to help navigate the VA system, someone to check in, someone to make sure they didn't fall through the cracks. "I want to call it the Second Chance Foundation," Victoria said, "because everyone deserves a second chance. And I want you to be part of it, Daniel. Not just as someone we help, but as someone who helps others. Your experience, your perspective, it's invaluable. Once you're back on your feet, I'd like to offer you a job as an outreach coordinator." Daniel couldn't speak. The lump in his throat was too big. Here was this woman offering him not just help, but purpose. Not just charity, but dignity. "I don't know what to say," he finally managed. "Say you'll let us help you," Robert said. "Say you'll help us build something that could change thousands of lives." Daniel nodded, unable to trust his voice. The press conference was scheduled for Friday at 10 in the morning. Victoria had rented out a conference room in a downtown hotel. She'd sent invitations to every major news outlet in the city. She'd prepared a speech. She'd even hired a publicist to handle the media coordination. Thursday night, Daniel barely slept. He kept going over what Victoria had told him to expect. There would be cameras. Lots of cameras. Reporters would ask questions. The video would probably be shown again. He needed to be prepared for attention, for scrutiny, for people wanting to know his story. "Just be yourself," Victoria had told him. "Just tell the truth. That's all anyone wants to hear." Friday morning arrived too quickly. Daniel put on his new suit, looking at himself in the mirror one more time. The man staring back still didn't quite feel like him, but maybe that was okay. Maybe this was a new version of himself, a version with a future. Victoria picked him up at 9. She looked nervous too, which somehow made Daniel feel better. At least he wasn't the only one scared out of his mind. "Ready?" she asked. "No," Daniel said honestly, "but let's do it anyway." The conference room was packed. Daniel hadn't expected this many people. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters filled every seat. When he and Victoria walked in, dozens of camera flashes went off at once. Daniel fought the urge to turn around and leave. Victoria walked up to the podium with confidence Daniel envied. She adjusted the microphone and looked out at the crowd. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "5 days ago, something happened that changed my life forever. Most of you have probably seen the video by now. My daughter's stroller rolled into traffic and this man," she gestured to Daniel, "saved her life without hesitation. What you might not know is who this man really is." She went on to tell Daniel's story. His military service, his Bronze Star, his 3 tours in Afghanistan, the PTSD, the divorce, the job loss, the homelessness. With every word, Daniel could feel the room's energy shift. The reporters were leaning forward, scribbling notes. Camera operators were zooming in. People were listening. "Daniel Hayes is a hero twice over," Victoria continued, her voice getting stronger. "Once for what he did for his country, and once for what he did for my family. But here's what makes me angry. Here's what should make all of us angry. This hero was sleeping on the streets. This man who saved lives, who earned medals for valor, who would have died for any of us without thinking twice. Our society abandoned him." She paused, letting that sink in. The room was completely silent. "So I'm here today to announce the Second Chance Foundation. I am personally contributing $5 million to start this organization, and I'm challenging every person and business in this city to match that contribution. This foundation will provide immediate housing, mental health care, and job training to homeless veterans. But more than that, it will provide dignity. It will provide the message that we see you, we value you, and we will not abandon you again." The room erupted with questions. Reporters were shouting, hands raised. Victoria held up her hand for quiet. "I know you have questions, and we'll answer them. But first I want Daniel to say a few words, because this isn't my story. It's his." Victoria stepped aside, and suddenly Daniel was standing at the podium, staring out at dozens of expectant faces. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. His hands gripped the podium to keep them from shaking. "I'm not good at speeches," he started, his voice rough. "I'm better at doing than talking. But Victoria asked me to be here, so here I am." He took a breath. "I didn't save that baby because I wanted to be a hero or because I wanted recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Anyone would have done the same." "But you didn't hesitate," a reporter called out. Everyone else froze. "You acted, why?" Daniel thought about that. "In the military, they train you to run toward danger, not away from it. I guess that training stuck. Even after everything else fell apart. You see someone in trouble, especially a kid, you don't think. You just move." Another reporter. "What do you want people to know about veteran homelessness?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I want people to know that we're not invisible. We're not statistics. We're people who served, who sacrificed, who came home different than when we left. And the system that's supposed to help us is broken. It's overwhelmed and underfunded, and we fall through the cracks. But it doesn't have to be this way." "What would you say to other veterans who are struggling?" "I'd say hold on," Daniel said quietly. "I'd say you're not alone even when it feels like you are. I'd say help is coming, real help. The kind that doesn't give up on you." He looked at Victoria. "Because of what this woman is doing, because of this foundation, things are going to change. Not just for me, but for all of us. That's what gives me hope." The questions continued for another 30 minutes. Daniel answered each one honestly, sometimes painfully so. He talked about the nightmares, the panic attacks, the shame of asking for change on a street corner, the cold nights, the hunger, the loneliness. But he also talked about the kindness he'd experienced, the shelter workers who treated him like a person, the strangers who stopped to talk, not just to drop money in his cup, the other homeless folks who became his family when he had no one else. When the press conference finally ended, Daniel felt exhausted but also lighter somehow, like he'd been carrying this heavy weight and finally got to set it down. Victoria hugged him tightly. "You were amazing," she said. "Absolutely amazing. Now what?" Daniel asked. Victoria smiled. "Now we change the world." The press conference video went viral within hours. Not just viral in the way people casually use that word, but truly explosive. By evening, it had been viewed 10 million times. By the next morning, that number had tripled. News stations across the country were running the story. Talk shows were discussing it. Social media was on fire with reactions, but the response wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't just people watching and moving on. People were angry, genuinely deeply angry, not at Daniel or Victoria, but at the system that had failed so badly. "How is this acceptable?" One viral tweet read, "A decorated veteran saves a child and he's homeless?" What are we even doing as a country? Another. I'm sitting here crying watching this. We send these men and women to war and then abandon them when they come home. This is disgusting. The hashtag Second Chance Heroes started trending worldwide. But more importantly, people weren't just talking. They were acting. Victoria's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Her email inbox was overflowing. The foundation had set up a donation page, and the numbers were climbing so fast it was hard to keep track. 10,000, 50,000, 100,000. Within 24 hours, they'd raised over $2 million from ordinary people. $5 here, $20 there. Hundreds of thousands of people contributing what they could. But then the big donations started coming in. A tech CEO in Silicon Valley pledged $1 million. A famous actor who'd played soldiers in movies pledged $2 million and posted about it to his 30 million followers. A group of NFL players pooled their money for $500,000. Companies were calling, wanting to help, wanting to be part of the solution. By the end of the first week, the Second Chance Foundation had raised over $23 million. Victoria couldn't believe it. She'd hoped to raise maybe $10 million over the first year. They'd done more than double that in 7 days. People want to help, Robert told her one evening as they watched the numbers continue to climb. They just needed to see a face. They needed to see Daniel. They needed to understand that these aren't just homeless people. They're heroes who fell on hard times. Victoria was already putting the money to work. She'd hired a team of social workers, counselors, and case managers. She'd leased a building that would serve as the foundation's headquarters. She'd reached out to apartment owners about housing. She'd contracted with therapists who specialized in PTSD and trauma. Everything was moving fast, faster than she'd imagined possible. But through it all, Victoria's focus remained on Daniel. Because if they couldn't help him successfully, if they couldn't show that this model worked, then the whole thing would fall apart. Daniel started therapy the following week. His therapist was a woman named Dr. Kim, a veteran herself who understood what he'd been through. The first session was hard. Daniel had spent years building walls around his pain, and now someone was asking him to tear those walls down. I'm not good at talking about feelings, he admitted in that first session. That's okay, Dr. Kim said. We'll start small. Just tell me about one moment from your service. Just one, it doesn't have to be traumatic. It can be anything. Daniel thought for a moment, then told her about his unit's translator, a young Afghan man named Rashid who'd risked his life every day to help them. Rashid had taught Daniel a few phrases in Pashto. He'd shared meals with the soldiers. He'd become a friend. On Daniel's last day in Afghanistan, Rashid had given him a small carved wooden box as a farewell gift. Where's the box now? Dr. Kim asked. I don't know, Daniel said quietly. I lost everything when I lost my apartment. It's probably in a landfill somewhere. That must be painful. Daniel nodded, surprised to feel tears in his eyes. He hadn't cried in years. Crying felt weak, and he couldn't afford to be weak. But sitting in Dr. Kim's office with someone who actually understood, the tears came anyway. It's okay to grieve what you've lost, Dr. Kim told him gently. Loss is loss, whether it's a friend or an apartment or a small wooden box. It all matters. Over the next few months, Daniel went to therapy twice a week. Some sessions were harder than others. Some left him feeling raw and exhausted. But slowly, gradually, he started to feel different. The nightmares didn't stop completely, but they became less frequent. The panic attacks became more manageable. He learned coping strategies, breathing techniques, ways to ground himself when the past threatened to overwhelm the present. Victoria had arranged for Daniel to live in a small house in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it was his. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room, a backyard with a tree. The first night Daniel slept there, he walked through every room, touching the walls, opening and closing doors, making sure it was real. The house came furnished with basics, but Victoria had left it mostly empty so Daniel could make it his own. It's your space, she'd told him. Make it feel like home. Daniel didn't know where to start. He'd lived with almost nothing for so long that having a whole house felt overwhelming. But he started small. He bought a coffee maker, a comfortable chair for reading, some books from a used bookstore. Slowly, the house started to feel like more than just a place to sleep. The foundation had also enrolled Daniel in a job training program. Since Victoria wanted him to eventually work as an outreach coordinator, he was learning about social services, case management, and nonprofit administration. He attended classes 3 days a week, studying harder than he had since high school. His classmates were a mix of people. Some were career changers. Some were young people just starting out. When they learned Daniel's story, most were incredibly respectful. A few were curious, asking thoughtful questions about his experience. Daniel appreciated their genuine interest, but the best part of his week was Thursdays. That's when Daniel started volunteering at a local shelter, the same one he'd stayed at before Victoria had found him. He'd help serve meals, talk to people, let them know about the resources available through the foundation. The people at the shelter knew him. They'd lived alongside him, so when Daniel showed up clean-shaven in decent clothes with hope in his eyes, it sent a powerful message. If Daniel could turn things around, maybe they could too. "Man, look at you," said George, a veteran in his 50s who'd been on the streets even longer than Daniel. "You really made it out." "I had help," Daniel said, "and that same help is available to you. Let me tell you about this foundation." Daniel became the foundation's most effective recruiter. He could talk to homeless veterans in a way that social workers couldn't. He understood their suspicion, their pride, their fear of getting their hopes up only to be disappointed again. He'd lived it all. "I know you don't trust the system," he'd tell them. "I didn't either. But this is different. These people actually care. They don't give up on you. Let me help you take the first step." By month 3, Daniel had personally brought 17 veterans into the foundation's program. Each one got housing, therapy, case management, and job training. Each one got a second chance. Victoria would sometimes join Daniel at the shelter. Little Lily would come too, now almost a year old and starting to walk. The veterans loved seeing the baby. It reminded them of their own kids, their own grandkids. The family some of them hadn't seen in years. "That's the baby you saved," George said to Daniel one day, watching Lily toddle around the shelter's common room. "Every time you look at her, you should remember what you did. You gave that little girl a life." Daniel smiled. "She gave me one too. Her and her mom." 6 months after the press conference, the foundation held its first big fundraising gala. It was a fancy event at a downtown hotel with a dinner and speeches and an auction. Daniel was asked to speak again, and this time he was less nervous. He'd gotten used to telling his story, had learned that sharing his experience could help others. He stood at the podium, looking out at a room full of wealthy donors, and told them what the past 6 months had meant to him. The therapy that was slowly healing his mind, the house that gave him stability, the job training that was preparing him for a future. But most of all, the dignity, the sense that he mattered again. "You're not just donating money," Daniel told the crowd. "You're giving people their lives back. You're saying that service matters, that sacrifice matters, that we're not disposable. On behalf of every veteran this foundation has helped, thank you. Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for not giving up on us." The speech received a standing ovation. Donations pledged that night totaled another $4 million. After the gala, Victoria pulled Daniel aside. Lily was with them, and she immediately reached for Daniel. He'd become her favorite person who wasn't her parents. Daniel scooped her up, and she giggled. "I have something for you," Victoria said, handing him an envelope. Inside was a job offer, official, on foundation letterhead. "Outreach coordinator with a real salary and benefits. Start date next month." "You've been ready for this for a while now," Victoria said. "You've already been doing the work. This just makes it official." Daniel stared at the paper, his vision blurring slightly. A job, a real job with a purpose. Not just any job, but one where he could help people like him every single day. "I don't know what to say," he managed. "Say yes," Victoria smiled. "Say you'll help us continue building this thing. Say you'll use everything you've learned, everything you've survived, to help others survive too." "Yes," Daniel said firmly. "Absolutely yes." Lily clapped her hands as if she understood this was a happy moment. Maybe she did. Babies are smarter than people give them credit for. That night, Daniel drove back to his house in his used car that the foundation had helped him purchase. He walked through his front door, made himself dinner in his own kitchen, and sat in his comfortable chair to read. It was a normal evening, a boring evening, and it was absolutely perfect. He thought about where he'd been a year ago, sleeping on cardboard, invisible to the world, surviving day by day with no hope of anything better. And now here he was. He had a home. He had a job. He had a purpose. He had a future, but more than that, he had proof that rock bottom isn't the end of the story. That falling doesn't mean you can't get back up. That one moment of courage can change everything. not just for one person, but for thousands. Daniel picked up his phone, something he still wasn't completely used to having, and looked at the background photo. It was from the gala, him holding Lily, both of them smiling at the camera, Victoria's arm around his shoulders. They looked like family, and in a way they were, tied together by fate and tragedy and hope. 1 year after Daniel saved baby Lily from that runaway stroller, Victoria decided to do something special. She wanted to mark the anniversary in a way that would show just how far they'd all come, not just Daniel, but everyone whose life had been touched by the Second Chance Foundation. The foundation had grown beyond anyone's wildest dreams. They'd helped over 300 veterans in that first year, 300 people who now had housing, therapy, job training, and most importantly, hope. The success rate was incredible. 90% of the veterans who entered the program were still housed after 6 months. 75% had found employment. Those numbers were unheard of in homeless services. Other cities had taken notice. Foundations in Chicago, Los Angeles, Boston, and Atlanta had reached out, wanting to replicate the model. Victoria had hired a team to help other organizations get started. The Second Chance approach was spreading across the country, but for Victoria it all came back to Daniel. He was the face of what was possible. He was proof that with the right support, people could rebuild their lives completely. Daniel had been working as an outreach coordinator for 6 months now, and he was exceptional at it. He had a way of connecting with homeless veterans that no one else could match. He'd sit with them for hours, just listening. He'd share his own story, letting them know he understood. He'd be patient when they were angry or suspicious. He'd celebrate small victories with them and support them through setbacks. His boss, the foundation's program director, told Victoria that Daniel was the best hire they'd ever made. He doesn't just do the job, she said. He lives it. Every person he helps, you can see it means something personal to him. Of course it did. Daniel saw himself in every veteran he worked with. He knew how close he'd come to giving up completely. He knew how easy it would have been to just fade away, become another statistic, another veteran lost to a system that couldn't save him. For the anniversary, Victoria planned a small celebration at the foundation's headquarters. She invited the staff, some of the veterans currently in the program, and several who'd successfully completed it and moved on to independent lives. The local news was coming to cover it. It would be a chance to showcase what they'd accomplished and encourage more support. The morning of the event, Daniel arrived early to help set up. He'd become close with many of the staff members. They weren't just co-workers, they were friends. Real friends who invited him to dinner, who asked about his life, who made him feel like part of a community. As Daniel was arranging chairs, he noticed someone familiar walk through the door. George, the veteran from the shelter who'd been on the streets for years. But George looked completely different. He was clean-shaven, wearing nice clothes, and most noticeably, he was smiling. "George?" Daniel said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Got my invitation," George said, holding up a piece of paper. 3 months housed, 2 months employed. Figured I should celebrate. Daniel pulled George into a hug. "Man, I'm so proud of you. Tell me everything." They sat down and George told his story. How he'd finally agreed to enter the program. How his case manager, a woman named Patricia, had helped him navigate the VA system and get the benefits he'd been owed for years. How therapy had helped him process the trauma he'd been carrying. How the job training program had helped him get certified as a truck driver. How he now had his own apartment and a steady job with a shipping company. "I wake up every morning in an actual bed," George said, his eyes getting misty. "And I still can't believe it's real. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up back at the shelter." "It's real," Daniel assured him. "You did this, George. You put in the work. You got me through the door," George said. "If you hadn't kept pushing me to try, I'd still be out there. So thank you, brother. Thank you for not giving up on me." Stories like George's were happening all over the city. The foundation tracked its success stories carefully. Veterans who'd been homeless for years now had apartments. Veterans who'd struggled with addiction were clean and sober. Veterans who'd been isolated and alone had found community. Veterans who'd given up on life had found reasons to keep going. The event started at 2 in the afternoon. The room filled up quickly with staff, volunteers, veterans, and donors. Victoria stood at the front with Lily, who was now walking and talking. Well, toddler talking, mostly one-word sentences and giggles. "Thank you all for coming," Victoria began. 1 year ago today, something happened that changed my life and set all of this in motion. I almost lost my daughter, but a man I'd probably walked past 100 times without really seeing saved her life. That man is Daniel Hayes, and he's here today not as someone we helped, but as a valued member of our team. She gestured to Daniel, who stood up reluctantly. He still wasn't comfortable being the center of attention. Daniel represents what this foundation is all about, Victoria continued. Second chances, dignity, the recognition that your worst day doesn't define you and that with support anything is possible. In the past year, Daniel has personally helped over 70 veterans enter our program. He's been a friend, a mentor, and an inspiration to everyone here. The room applauded. Daniel felt his face get hot. He caught George's eye and George gave him a thumbs up. But this isn't just about Daniel, Victoria said. This is about all of you. Every veteran who had the courage to ask for help. Every staff member who works tirelessly to provide that help. Every donor who believed in this mission. Every volunteer who gave their time. We're all part of this story. She paused, looking down at Lily, who was playing with Victoria's necklace. My daughter is alive because one person chose to act. This foundation exists because many people chose to act. And hundreds of lives have been changed because all of us chose to believe that we can do better, that we must do better, for those who served our country. Victoria then did something that surprised everyone. She pulled up a screen and started showing photos. Not just any photos, but before and after images of veterans in the program. Each one told a story of transformation. Men and women who looked broken and defeated in the before pictures, and hopeful and proud in the after pictures. There was George, looking gaunt and weathered in his before photo, and healthy and smiling in his current one. There was Michelle, a female veteran who'd been living in her car, now in front of her new apartment. There was Tommy, who'd struggled with addiction for years, now celebrating 6 months sober with his case manager. As each photo appeared, Victoria shared a brief update. This person now works as a mechanic. This person reconnected with their family. This person started college. This person volunteers at a food bank. Each story was a miracle in its own way. But then Victoria showed one more image and Daniel's breath caught. It was him, his before photo, taken from a still shot of the viral video. He looked rough, tired, defeated. And next to it, a recent photo of him at work, talking to a veteran, genuine care and understanding on his face. This is what happens when we don't give up on people, Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. This is what happens when we see the person, not just their circumstances. This is what happens when we offer not just help but hope. The room was silent for a moment, then someone started clapping, then another person. Then everyone was on their feet applauding. But they weren't just clapping for Daniel. They were clapping for everyone in the room who'd been part of this journey. After the formal program ended, people mingled and shared stories. The local news interviewed several veterans. Donors talked to staff about how they could help more. And in the middle of it all, Daniel found himself holding Lily while Victoria talked to a reporter. Lily looked up at him with her big eyes. She was so much bigger than that day he'd grabbed her stroller. So much had changed since then.